Is it the Canva that's locked?
Right now?
Okay.
Is it working?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. It must have been something with the way that I added Walia. Walia is in the Zoom room.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. So one of the nice things about Person First in that approach was that it did give us like a to do and to don't list. And I know this graphic is too small for you to read from there. You will have access to these slides, but I can let you know that it says, first of all, it lets us know not to use certain slurs, which should be on your don't list. We should know the R word slur. Most of you, I hope, know that the M word or midget is an inappropriate word for little people. Instead, you want to use little person or person with dwarfism. Many little people also are okay with dwarf, but that varies a little bit. So I think little person is your safety term there. So some of the Person First advocacy really focused on letting people know, look, these terms are outdated, like handicapped and crippled. And here's what you should say instead, which gave people a new sense of confidence in knowing how to write about disability and how to talk about it, especially professionally. So one of the rules that crosses over between kind of Person First and the other form that I'm going to talk about is to avoid made-up words or euphemisms. So things like differently abled, even special needs, which is more controversial because we know that, especially in the education space, people have really latched onto that. Many parents are more comfortable saying special needs rather than disability. It doesn't necessarily mean that that is a good thing. It could speak to their kind of trajectory of learning about and integrating disability into their life, but I do think that you have to meet people where they are too. So one of the takeaways I'm hoping to get across today is that as you learn these new reasons that people use different language options, that you don't want to become the language police. You want to gently kind of have more understanding about where they're coming from. And then as you have opportunities, especially with professionals and colleagues, you kind of model and guide people in different directions is the hope. But kind of both approaches agree that it's not helpful when we avoid the word disability or disabled. And there are some pretty funny made up words to avoid it. One of my favorites is diffabled, which sounds like someone has like got something in their mouth or something. But we really have to ask ourselves, like, why are we going out of our way not to say a word? And if we can't even say the word, then we're going to have a really hard time talking about tough issues behind it. This is another campaign that was used actually by the International Paralympic Committee. So now we're looking at like international uses of the word or the concept of disability. And so this is kind of what this group agreed upon. And I competed in the 2004 Paralympics, and I can definitely tell you that the approaches to disability are so fascinating to see from around the world. So it's interesting that, the group was able to agree on these 4 things. So they agreed that rather than saying victim, handicapped, retarded, differently abled, or crippled, we wanted to use the word disability in some way, shape, or form. They agreed that rather than saying normal, we want to say person without disabilities. You'll also hear non-disabled, which is actually both of those, person without disability or non-disabled, are actually preferred than able-bodied. And that's a rather new change. When you say able-bodied, first of all, you minimize disability down to being a physical bodily experience. So if I'm talking about someone with an intellectual disability and I say, oh, that person is able-bodied, it doesn't make a ton of sense. So non-disabled is more clear too. One of my favorite authors and researchers is Brene Brown. And I know you all are going to hear a lot about her this year because Jen and Steph and Jane are fans as well. But, one of her quotes is clear is kind. And I think that is connected to this topic as well. We're trying, sometimes people are trying to be kind when they are looking for other words, when they don't want to say whatever aspect of disability they're uncomfortable in avoiding, but clear is kind. If you're talking about somebody's mobility equipment or wheelchair, I can assure you that it makes a lot more sense to just say that rather than to. I've been in the situation where people are like, well, where are you going to put, that? And I'm trying to guess, like, what are they talking about? yeah, so it just say whatever, clear is kind. Even if you're not sure, you can always say, I'm sorry, I wasn't sure how to word that or whatever, but trying to be clear is helpful. And then the rest here is just clarifying that it's Paralympics instead of Para-Olympics. People get testy about that because we have our own name. We're not just like the Para-Olympics. And then this is an important one. So rather than confined to a wheelchair or afflicted, or you also, unfortunately, still in our EPIC, it's one of the things that I chip away at. Still in our EPIC, we have wheelchair bound as a way to list patients' mobility. And that is, not accurate because I'm not like taped to my wheelchair. And that's always what I picture. A wheelchair is a freeing, liberating piece of equipment. It's how I get around. So, and I know that, I don't expect people to put in EPIC liberated by wheelchair either. That's a bit much, but, wheelchair user, I think is clear, doesn't have any values, is neutral and describes what you need to describe. So is person first the only or always the best way to describe disability? And that answer is no, which is surprising to some because people have really invested in person first. Little kids are taught person first, which I think is an awesome introduction to disability awareness. But again, we don't want to, deputize language police. And I can tell you there are a lot. When I have submitted my bios in journals for publication, I have been corrected by non-disabled editors to not say that I'm a disabled woman, but rather to say that I'm a woman with a disability. And so that experience of being told by a non-disabled person how to identify is unique in itself. So the other major approach is called identity first language. And this has been, so Kathy Snow, a parent advocate, championed person first language. Identity first language has been championed really from the autistic advocacy movement. And people in this movement said that their identity as a disabled person or an autistic person is a part that they wanted to claim. And so they've given examples to say things like, I would not say that I'm a person who is a woman. Or sometimes you'll hear people say a person who happens to have a disability. And you can think about how that might sound as if you connected that to gender identity too. I wouldn't say I'm a person who happens to be a woman, even though it's about genetically as likely as my disability happens to be because it was a genetic mutation. Not that being a woman is a mutation, but you know what I mean. So these are some quotes from 2 articles about kind of this language choice. So the first one says, non-disabled professionals can be disability allies by supporting efforts to normalize the word disability. So that's really our top line goal here, whether you use person first or identity first is not the concern as much as let's actually use the word disability. And then Dunn and Andrews is the green box there. And from their article, they explain that disability is not a state of impairment, it's culturally composed. So it's an unequal distribution of power, material, and status. And if you boil it down to just diagnosis, you miss this other piece of the puzzle. Aaron Andrews, who published both of these, and myself and our colleague Robin Powell, we published an article just a couple weeks ago, so I haven't had a chance to kind of integrate it here, but we titled it Evolution of Disability Language, and I included it in your extra materials today. And so we really made the case that rather than bicker over identity first or person first, allowing some flexibility and recognizing, validating both forms of language. And we actually just found out this week, we didn't ask for this to happen, but the Journal of Disability and Health adopted our recommendations as new editorial standards. So rather than, they previously had only person first. Yeah, that was exciting news. I just found out, yeah. So now they will have flexibility in the way that they allow their articles to be published so that readers will see that variance. And hopefully what we've had to do in the past is whenever we wanted to write an identity first, we have to put like a footnote that explains that, hey, we know what person first is, and we're not saying we don't like it. But there are reasons that we're using people's preferences for how to identify. So I think for me, the evolution is exciting because I see room for both. When I am around really disability culture rich places, it's not uncommon to have people use words like cripple to describe themselves. But, I would never do that in a professional like publication sense. And for me personally, I don't connect to that word. And I think it's largely because growing up in Kentucky, I was frequently referenced as the cripple girl. And so I have a hard time like now connecting that to like a progressive identity first approach. So I think we have to think about that too, in that just because we put disabled first and we don't use the person first formula, we're not necessarily applying the ideas of identity first. So I'm pretty sure that when people like call me that in Walmart in Kentucky still, they're not like embracing identity first. Yeah, so it's sometimes the intent behind the language. This is a quote that we have from an advocate, Aaron Schroeder, that says, "When I say that I am disabled, I am not reducing myself to a label. I'm embracing a personal and cultural identity that affects every aspect of my life." So there's actually a whole campaign. If you're on Twitter or Instagram or probably on Facebook, although it doesn't pull up hashtags as well, but it's called #SayTheWord, which really addresses society's discomfort with disability and working to encourage people to, for example, if a story is about people with healthcare needs or chronic illness or whatever it is, recognizing that that is a disability issue and using the word disability. One of the really cool groups I think that we've worked with on this that has shown some progress has been the Free Britney movement. I don't know about you all, but I was a big Britney Spears fan, still am. And so helping her, has a really strong group of advocates who fought to help her overturn her conservatorship. And what a lot of people don't realize is that there are thousands of other people in California, only we're talking about, not to mention other states, but in really restrictive conservatorships like that. So helping that group that learned about conservatorship, learned about her case, what freedom she had lost unfairly, helping them realize that, hey, there are other people. They don't necessarily have the bank accounts that Britney Spears does. They may not look like her, but this is actually a disability issue. And so getting comfortable with that word was a challenge for them. There's still a big question mark. I don't think that Britney Spears identifies as a disabled person. She, I think at different points identifies with psychiatric disability itself, but has had a really bad relationship with her treatment, obviously. So yeah, so that always gets tricky too, when, the individual at the center of that, Britney herself, may or may not identify as disabled, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not a disabled issue. I also encounter that challenge working on a lot of parenting with disabilities issues. Many parents with intellectual disabilities, there's virtually no benefit to them identifying as, raising their hand and saying, yep, I'm a parent with a disability. And instead, there are a lot of risks they take if they ever verbally admitted that or identified as that. So it's often an issue of trying to connect supports that are relevant for parents with intellectual disabilities without necessarily requiring like that ID card at the start. And that's unusual. The way that a lot of our disability services are set up is very much like a gatekeeping. If you think about how, if you've ever needed or known anyone who's needed accommodations through your school process, often the language in syllabus or wherever else is that, you have to get documentation. You have to prove to us that you have this disability. So there's definitely a fear in our, especially American disability systems of, fraud and like exorbitant use. And those types of issues are not actually backed up by research. There aren't a ton of people out trying to pretend they have things that they don't. But it is definitely a gate kind of keeping approach that we have, which can make identity that much more difficult. And I also at the top of this slide have a picture of a cat with one eye. And there's some interest around, so there's a made up word there, specially abled, pure love. And there's like a whole genre for the internet of disabled animals. Americans, I guess more than Americans, but people on the internet really love disabled animals. So that's interesting. What that says about us, I'm not sure. So I actually do have a 3-legged dog, for full disclosure. And the entire reason I adopted her was because she was a dog with a disability. So So I think there's like a natural level of frustration as you're trying to learn this and get it right, where sometimes people will say, this is confusing, just tell me what to say. So I hope that you have a better understanding of that there are good reasons to use different forms of language. If you aren't sure, you can default back to person first language. Even better than that, not more better. You can ask a person what they prefer, what words they use. If you are patient and have the opportunity, often they will guide you and show you. You want to avoid correcting a person with a disability in their choice of language. They likely have a reason for that. It may be what their family uses. And unless you're in a certain unique role where they, trust you in that capacity and you want to talk through why they use certain words, then, you probably want to avoid that definitely on first meeting them. But I think in general, working on our cultural humility is complicated, and that is okay. It's worth it. It's more than just political correctness. It's about dignity and respect and recognizing how far we've come. In my next time that I'm with you, we're going to talk about history of disability. And I hope you'll think back to this and realize, we've come a long way. Much of it you haven't heard about because we're not taught about disability history in school, unfortunately. So it totally makes sense that the way we talk and think about disability has changed as well. All right, so before we move into our media section, what questions do you have about language or word use, or any comments about observations that you've seen so far and how your patients do or don't talk about disability? It doesn't have to be patients either, it could be people. Yeah, Caitlin.
Just an observation with some of the patients, like parents that I've seen. Notice like parents sometimes are hesitant to talk about like their kid having disability because they like don't want them to have that disability.
Yeah.
So that's just something I've noticed. Like the parent almost doesn't want to accept it, which can be hard sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, that can be really difficult to know how to talk to that parent as a provider, I would imagine. Helping them with that acceptance, I would hope, but also not pushing them beyond, where their comfort level at that time is. Many parents feel more comfortable with special needs. The reason that that's often pushed back against is that there's no history attached to special needs. There's no laws that protect people with special needs. There's no culture. So it's really missing a lot of the other pieces of why people encourage disability. But I think for some people it's a starting place, and then they can hopefully progress from there. And there's a lot of reinforcement in our society. I mean, as a psychologist, I definitely notice people are rewarded by carrying on some of the avoidance of disability or some of the tropes that we're going to talk about next. People eat it up just like the disabled animals on Instagram. They have great songs. So anything else about language before we go on? Okay. Wording. And if you're not sure, all of your Lynn faculty are more than happy to talk through issues with you about how to put something or how to say something. So keep that in mind for the whole year. This is a safe place, and no one's gonna respond to you with like, I'm so offended by what you just, we're gonna help you work through it. So, all right. So one of the reasons that we have a difficult time thinking and talking about disability is because there's such a lack of representation of disability in the media. So depending on your source, this source has only 13% of Americans noted as disability, but some have upwards of a quarter, 1 in 4 people have disabilities, depending again on how you define disability. Keeping in mind though that, as people age, they're more likely to have a disability. Thankfully, in my opinion, there are earlier identification of disability in children so that we can support them in the ways that they need. So while it looks like that we now have more kids with disabilities than we did, we really are doing a better job of identifying those. But there's only 2% of characters in the top 100 movies and televisions that have disability, not obvious, like that have a disability as part of their character. That doesn't mean that they are actually people with disabilities playing that role. That's another issue, but still there's a huge lack of representation in terms of what does our society look like, and then what does our media look like. There's also an issue of that people with disabilities often, when they are portrayed in media, take up kind of the same repeated stories and repeated roles. So these are actually pulled from research. This was just my idea, although I've seen these. But so they are objects of pity, sinister or evil. So if you think back at a lot of the villains of your childhood movies, many of them may have like a facial deformity or walk with a hunchback, or some type of disability is common in the villainous, character in a movie. The super cripple role, in quotes, is this idea of that the only way you can be successful with a disability is to overcome it. So you're a super crip, you're just like a superhero kind of. Laughable is a common kind of stereotype. His or her own worst enemy. So kind of this like bumbling, stumbling character that doesn't have a lot of depth. The character is portrayed as a burden to others, as non-sexual, and being unable to participate in daily life. So when our media does have disability representation, unfortunately, it often falls into one of these stereotypes. So we're kind of like reinforced in believing that these are actual representations of how people with disabilities are in the real world. And the biggest problem with that is that these, above all, the dominant images of disabled people are crude, one-dimensional, and simplistic. So it's not to say that there shouldn't be any, evil characters or villains in movies that have disabilities. It's just that shouldn't be their main defining characteristic that we know them by. There's more nuance and depth to all people, including people with disabilities. And so that depth is really what's missing. It's also a shame because we're retelling the same story. And once you start to notice this, it'll probably annoy you too, in that it's kind of lazy journalism, lazy media storytelling, in that there are so many awesome stories out there that we're missing out on ones that challenge us away from the same stories over and over again. So you've probably seen some of these memes, and these are examples of inspiration porn as well. So the one on the left is Cody McFarland. He's now a college student, but here he is as a little kid that this image lives on in time, and it has over top of it, "Your excuse is invalid." So thinking about, first of all, if you really break it down, it's a little strange, right? This kid's just doing his thing, looks happy. Like, what does that mean? Like, but what it's the base of inspiration porn and why it's called pornography. And it was coined by my late friend, Stella Young. So she lived in Australia. She had the same disability that I did. So I was fortunate to know her as we were growing up in the MySpace days. We would message, and then we moved to Facebook. But she has an amazing TED Talk that I hope you will watch. If we used to build it in here, but then we cut it so we could have more discussion time. But it's really an amazing talk called "I'm Not Your Inspiration, Thank You Very Much." And it explains why inspiration porn is named what it is, because it's objectifying of the individual to make others feel better. So the idea of watching this kid who's doing awesome, running on 2 prosthetic legs, and thinking that the message that you take away from that is that that you have a better body than he does, so your excuse is invalid, when he seems to be doing fine. But also, this stock photo is like recreated millions of times for some apparent reason. They take a hospital rental chair and they put it in the middle of the beach, and then they always sit a apparently non-disabled person down in it and have her outstretch her arms. So if you Google wheelchair, stock photo, you'll see like images through the era of this. Somebody always thinks this is a good idea. So the quote over top of this one says, "Never ignore somebody with a disability. You don't realize how much they can inspire you." And if you look through things like this that are shared, and as people who obviously all have some interest in disability, when you signed up for this program, this is the section where I don't want you to be like, oh my God, I've shared that picture. It's okay, because we're knowing better, doing better, right? I do know that people's intentions are varied. So maybe their intentions are to help with representation because they think, there's not enough people in wheelchairs in my social media. I need to share this so that people see these people exist. That's a good intention, right? But the message really suggests that people with disabilities are here primarily or entirely to inspire non-disabled people. It's as if their existence, that's like the peak of the mountain you could achieve as a disabled person, would be to inspire a non-disabled person. And that's not really what I'm hoping for every single day. And, sometimes people find different things inspiring too, and it can be confusing as a disabled person. If you read Sitting Pretty, she talks about this really eloquently, but I've definitely had experiences that she describes where people stop me doing like what I consider pretty mundane things, like getting a gallon of milk. Now I use ClickList, so I've avoided this interaction for many years, for 2 years at least. But people are very struck by me getting milk and gas, and they will stop and and just congratulate me for those acts. And it's just it ranges from like awkward to insulting to a point, depending on my mood at the moment. And it's not to say, there's a good bit of awkwardness in the land of disability, and that's okay. To share one that's kind of related, I guess, is I came home on Friday and there was like this Cadillac in my driveway, and my husband was out front. My husband's also in a wheelchair, and he's talking to this guy. And it was one of those conversations that you come upon where these people just met. Because Adam's like telling him about something that, like getting to know him. And I'm thinking, who is this guy? I didn't know we were having a random visitor. I think it was like Friday at like 5:30. And then the guy's telling him about where he used to work. And so Adam was out there talking to the guy for like more than 20 minutes. He comes in and I'm like, who was that? And he said, oh, he's just in a wheelchair. And so I was like, what? So I guess he's driven by our house several times. And when we're out in our front yard, he's seen two people in wheelchairs. And so this guy like randomly pulled up and they chatted it up for 20 minutes, which to a lot of people would seem awkward, but in a disability sense made total sense to these two guys at the time. So I think it's not to say that awkward is what you want to avoid, I guess is my point here. It's that you want to think about a deeper meaning and intention, and you want to think about who may be the object of your story, and is that person an active participant? So we want to avoid exploitation. So these are two examples. The one, we have seen this play out a few times on the media where like a fast food worker will help someone who needs help feeding, and then a person in the restaurant will like take a picture over the booth and then share it and say something like, there are still good people in the world. And there's a few things to think about in this. Like, first of all, do you want a picture taken of you while you're eating your Big Mac without anybody knowing and then being shared millions of times? No. Also, while it's friendly of these, it's helpful of these food workers who do this, it never do these articles capture the deeper problem of what a problem we have in our country with home and community-based services, where think about being in a position where you're hungry, you need lunch, you're able to get to the place to get the food, buy the food with your money, but you can't physically get it in your mouth. And recognizing that we don't have great answers for that in our system. So these are often shared as a way to make everybody feel better about themselves other than the person who was the object of that picture. And then more explicit, like egregious, awful examples, I hope that you will help by reporting. This is an example that last year, thankfully, I didn't see it repeat this year. On TikTok, they were using a picture of a well-known blogger who has a facial deformity disability, and they were telling kids that that was their school teacher of the year. So then they were capturing the kids' reactions. So you can kind of see the woman's face that they were using is in the smaller block up top, but they were like showing that to a child and saying, look, I just got your teacher's picture, here she is. And then the child was, having a response to that, and everybody's, laughing. So that is a more explicit example of trying to elicit fear in response to seeing somebody with a visible or a facial disability And so that's pretty like red flag ableism. And, I report these things. I don't know if I don't know that it really helps. I usually get back from Facebook that this doesn't violate our standards, but it makes me feel better. So, but yeah, these are pretty egregious, and I encourage you to speak up about those. Another more on the egregious side of things, but less often scrutinized, is the filicide of people with disabilities in media coverage. So filicide means murder by parents. And so you will occasionally see articles about where a parent of a child with a disability killed the child. And interestingly, the headlines almost never portray it as a murder. They will say something like this headline: autism's terrible toll, parents risk hitting a breaking point, is what they put in quotes. Whereas the result of this story was murder of a person. And it trickles all the way down actually to the outcomes of these court cases, where research has been done that shows how minimally these parents are held accountable, because our society really believes that it's understandable that you would kill certain children. And that, I hope we can all agree, is no matter what level of stress you're under, it's not acceptable that you murder a child, any child, no matter what degree their disability. So when you have access to these slides, that underlined link, the Anti-Filicide Toolkit, is an excellent resource from the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network that gives journalists an idea of how they could word that more accurately. Because again, we're not asking people to be nice, or we're just asking people to tell the real story, just like they would any other article that they wrote about. It also has some great tips about how you could respond as an advocate or an ally, because these are tough. I mean, I will say, as someone who tries to speak up in response to these, the pushback is not always kind, and that people really want you to know how stressful it can be. And not that I doubt that it is, but I would hope we could all agree that it's not a good idea to message out that that's an acceptable choice. So best practices for capturing nuance. You always want to include the direct perspective of the people that you're writing about. So if you or somebody else is writing about anything related to people with disabilities, one of the first things you want to check to see their credibility is, did they actually ask the person? And this doesn't happen more often than you would think. So one of the mantras that you'll hear throughout the year is nothing about us without us, which is something that we try to practice in multiple forms, but especially in storytelling about disability. Don't assume that barriers are explained by the disability itself. So many of our barriers are created by society and the way that we've defined, which bodies and which minds are better than others. So we'll talk more about disability models, but I think this helps as an introduction to that. And then treating disability as another diversity factor in your reporting or writing is helpful as well. So I think that representation in disability in media is improving. We see some great examples in the last couple of years. We see more mainstream advertisements that are included, that are just kind of part of the flow. Like Target has had some great campaigns, other brands have as well, but it hasn't been necessarily disability centric, but more like integrated and inclusive of disability, which is really cool. Disney, one of their, I don't think it was in films, but oh gosh, what's the name of this? Luca, yeah. The father, it has an arm amputation. It was kind of a cool like aspect of that character, but not like a central piece. He wasn't villainous because of his arm. He didn't have like huge, it was, you kind of have to see the movie to know, but it was integrated in the story with depth, and a lot of people appreciate that. Red Panda has also been praised as a recent release that was positive in its portrayal of disability. There's actually lots of fun little disability things you can see in Red Panda. There's like a cochlear implant in one scene and a diabetes pump in another. So it's fun to watch for those. And then Crip Camp, which is a film that I hope, if you haven't seen, you see at some point this year. It would be great to watch that in tandem with our disability history lecture in a week or two. So I think it's improving. And this is how you can reach me. And I think I shared that it's in your slides as well. And then you have it in your Lind materials as well. So I think we're 5 minutes over, but I guess we can just, I did want to ask you that last question. What are your thoughts? Do you think that representation is improving, or what are some good examples that you've seen lately? Or bad examples, if you want to. Yeah.
It's on Netflix. It's a kid's movie, but one of the characters, her name is Esperanza, and she's in a wheelchair.
Oh, yeah.
I know.
Raising Dion. Yeah. Yeah.
And I really like there was one episode where he was like showing his superhero capabilities, and he picked her up. She got super upset.
Yeah.
And I like
Yeah.
the conversation that we had about why she was upset.
Yeah. That's cool. So Raising Dion, I think is the name of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the author is Samantha Haney, I think. I know her last name's Haney. She also has OI. We have great disability. But she is super cute, but also really a good speaker about. So that particular episode, he used his superhero powers to like cure her disability. And she really, in character, explained why, like, why would you assume that's what I would want, would be to walk? And so, yeah, that's a great example. Yeah.
I feel like there are a lot of shows that feature a main character with autism.
Mhm.
I have lots of friends who often tell me, "Oh, have you seen this show?" Or that's
Yeah.
for people who don't have children with autism. And I usually don't watch it because that usually doesn't portray my child's experience.
Yeah.
But I know that there's a lot more, now
Mhm.
than there used to be.
There's a really good short that, and I'm not familiar with your child, but I have heard that critique of, not being good representation across the spectrum. And so there's a really good short about a young girl or a teenage girl, I think, who's nonverbal. And I'll try to find it and share it with you all. But the best part is that the audio and the consulting was done with a person who doesn't speak verbally with autism. And so it was authentic in that way. And it was good. But yeah, it is kind of a bummer when you want there to be representation. And then when you watch it and it's completely like not real or authentic.
Can't relate to
Yeah, can't relate. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
It kind of goes back a little bit when you were talking about, I guess, parents that commit crimes against their disabled children.
Mhm.
I was just wondering because there was a situation a couple of years ago where there was an elderly parent that was caring for a intellectually disabled child. He was about maybe 50, and she was losing her fight with cancer. And I guess when she got towards the end, she took medication and she gave him medication, and they both, I guess, transitioned, if you want to say, at the same time. And there was a very long letter that she left out, talking about the father didn't want to be bothered. They really didn't have family. One time when she was in the hospital, he had to go into an institution, and when she went to get him and visit him, he was highly sedated. He was just sitting there, slop, coming out his mouth and everything. And I was just wondering, as far as data when it comes to certain things like that, because we do have caregivers that are older. I'm just trying to figure out, are there different avenues or different ways to kind of help them plan that part so that we don't have situations like that? Like, I didn't know what the data was on that, or is anybody even really looked at it? Or just
Yeah.
assumed this person was sick in the head and said, I'm gonna kill myself and my kid, when it was actually maybe more to it than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that brings up a few issues in terms of, we hope that people start, I think there's much more emphasis now on transition planning, so that people can have plans set up in wills and estate plans, and that they can work with people to understand what resources are available. I'm not going to pretend like there are always great resources available. I think that the situation you describe, involves so many difficult things in terms of an aging caregiver. And it sounds like a bad experience of inpatient hospitalization, to put it minimally. So it's not to suggest that finding other solutions are easy or that there are great solutions available, but it's more to kind of draw the boundary around that. In our country, we at this point don't have, assisted, we don't have that option to basically euthanize others. No matter how peacefully we decide that we're going to do it or we think it is, it's just not, it's not an option off the table. And I wish there were, or it is an option off the table. I wish I could say, there was XYZ that would have been a perfect solution for that family. I don't know. Our OI community had a somewhat similar case in that we had a mom who had OI, and, had multiple broken bones throughout her life and was struggling with some chronic pain as an adult. And she had a 12-year-old daughter who also had OI. And, again, we never know. I don't think all the fill in the blanks about the situation, but she also gave herself and her daughter a lethal dose of medication. And so it was murder and suicide. And, those are the words that our journalism culture uses to describe an act like that. But what's interesting, I think, is that when disability is involved, we think about it differently. And it's not to vilify the other individual who died. It's just to recognize that we hope to support people before they would pursue such an act. So, yeah.
Just clarification, OI, what does that stand for?
Osteogenesis imperfecta. So that's my type of disability. Yep. Thank you for catching that. Okay. Somebody asked me a uplifting question before we go to the book. What's a good representation that you've seen? Yeah.
Well, this is my personal experience. So I had an aunt who was disabled,
Mhm.
and late from the time I was born, and she lived till she was 70. And at the time, it's a taboo word, but she was retarded, right? Now I have a son who has autism, and that word is now completely taboo, right? It's like saying a cuss word.
Yeah.
So in my mind, first language, we've come so far.
Yeah.
From where we were. So it is impressive. It's perfect. But are we much better, or are we in a much better place than we were, 20, 30 years ago, even 5 years ago, right? I have kids, other teenage kids, and they're comfortable talking with their friends about, you don't use that word. And that's an insult. And so I think it says something as a community and as a group, we've come so much further than we used to be.
That's true. It really is cool. And who knows where what we'll be talking about 10 years from now. And hopefully we'll have that patience with each other as we grow. Yeah.
I was just gonna add that something else, there's a lot of things I don't love about social media.
Yeah.
One thing I think is that lets people more easily speak or represent themselves.
Yeah.
So I know that I've learned a lot by following on Instagram, for example, and that's by their own choice. That's a big part of what they talk about there. And
Yeah.
so it's not that different kind of media representation, but I think that's hopefully will help make progress in the midst of all the other not great stuff happening on there too.
Yeah, that's a great point and a perfect segue too, because, I think curating your life is a challenge that we didn't have pre-social media, right? Like, yes, analytics from social media do kind of feed us what Google or Facebook or whatever wants us to see, but you also have some control in what you curate. And so making a conscious effort to add some positive portrayals of disability and some direct portrayals, you want to make sure you have a decent mix. If you're open to this, because I know sometimes people don't want their professional world and their personal world, but if you're open to that, making sure you have a mix of, parents of kids with disabilities, adults with disabilities. So curating your life and looking for those creators. And in your book club, the module today, I linked up, if the author of your book has a social media account, I linked those up so you can add those. Now, a couple of them Harriet McBride unfortunately passed away, so she doesn't, but I linked up her obituary, which is really powerful. But almost all the other authors, you can see their content that's continuing to grow every day, and all of them are that have content are really leaders in that space. So yeah, so I think we are ready to take a quick bio break and then get my book.
All right. So we'll take a 5-minute bio break. And then when we come back, as you trickle back in, let's get into our group so you know where to go. And we're just going to do our best with moving chairs and not necessarily tables. Kara, I'm going to put you guys up here. And Leah, I think you're in Kara's group, I believe. So what I was going to have you do is log off of this Zoom, give me 5 minutes, and then I'm going to have you log back in, and we're going to put you on a laptop so that you can sit and just be in a small group with your room, because otherwise the whole room can hear you. So we won't want that. And we don't want you to have to hear the whole room either. And then let's see, Lisa, do you want to maybe take this front corner over here? And could you remind everyone what book you have? Haben. All right, great. So Haben will be over here when we return. Leslie, put you your group back over there. Which book did you have? Being Human. Great. So, and then Elizabeth, which book? Out of My Mind. We'll kind of put in this like a little mini middle area where Nellie and Sam are. Jen, what book did you have? Fall Down 7. We'll have you guys kind of come up here. And then Jane, what book did you have? Win the Heart. And then just maybe Kara's sitting pretty up here. Yeah, she's literally and figuratively. And Jane will be in the back corner. And then anybody who read Accidents by Nature can kind of hover around my little space over there by the wall. We're missing one? No? Oh, Haben, up here. Yep, you're with Lisa. All right. So, well, Leah, I'm going to shut this one off and then give us about 2 minutes, and then I'll bring you back into the other one. Same link, though, same link. Now I gotta figure out how to do. Kara, do you want to turn on and? All right. We will come all back. Follow Dr. Kara's lead here.
All right. So hopefully you had some good discussions about what stood out to you. Yeah, we had a really rich discussion. So I'm going to let us go first. To describe Sitting Pretty by Rebecca Tussig. Okay. Do we want to pass this mic around? Is that?
Would that be okay? And actually, if people that are like talking, if they could come and sit like where Caitlin's desk is right there, that would be ideal so that we can get you on camera for the recording. And then we can just leave that microphone where it is. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so we had Sitting Pretty, and this book is a memoir, if you cover, and it is composed of a bunch of different essays, which I just learned in our discussion that actually a lot of them started as her Instagram captions. She has an Instagram account, Sitting_Pretty, but she really talks about her life as she uses a wheelchair and her experience with finding accessible housing, kind of what Kara talked about today too, like her experiences with like people offering her help with like everyday things that she's like, I don't need help with this. This is something I do all the time. She was a teacher for a while for high schoolers and taught a disabilities studies course, and her experience with that and like basically like conflict with the students, and just some of them were interesting. And yeah, and she just really gives a lot of good insight. And we talked about how this book didn't really feel like niche, like to a certain disability. Her insight like was very like thorough and could be applied to any disability, whether it's like older acquired, later in life, or developmental or whatnot. So it was really great and a really good read. So we recommend it.
Awesome. So thumbs up on Sitting Pretty.
Yep.
guys want to go next? We can like work our way around this way.
Johnny,
Oh, it's me, I'm like furiously writing notes. So can you hear me with this one? Okay. So we read the book Habin, which is a story of a young a woman who was from Eritrea. She was born, I think we decided she was deafblind at birth. She was her whole life. And it's the story of her life and how she advocated for herself. It began when she obviously was a child, and accumulated with that she graduated from Harvard Law School, met the president and vice president of the United States. We talked, the book was really good because it was the story of her advocating for herself from the time she was very young, all the way through Harvard and beyond. And like in her childhood, we talked about the difference. She was born, from a different culture. So there was a lot of cultural expectations in her family, and she had to break through those in order to accomplish everything she had. From childhood, she wanted to, expected to stay at home, but wanted to go on a mission trip. And of course, accomplishing all of this, being a deafblind person and advocating for herself when she was on these trips, that people could communicate with her and she could accomplish her goals. One of the stories that really stood out was when she, I believe, was college. She was in the cafeteria and she wanted them to send her the menu so she could print it in Braille so she would know what was to eat, because she couldn't see or hear, right? She didn't know what it was. She would just kind of guess. And how she advocated for herself to get that done so that going forward, there would be others that would benefit. Everybody who came behind her would benefit. So that was the story. It was a fabulous book. It was super inspirational. It talked a lot about ableism and how people just assume that you're not capable because you have disability, and how she overcame that. And it wasn't just because she had disability. She was just a smart, intellectually, a bright person who was able to accomplish that, not just because she was deaf and blind, but she used that to her advantage to help advocate for others. Does that all right? Okay. Considering we only figured out, like when you said come up with a summary, that was great. We were too busy talking about how much we like.
Awesome.
Hi, Lisa.
So my group, we had Being Human, an unrepentant memoir of a disability rights activist. And we all agreed that we're so mad we never knew who Judy Human was until reading this book. So this book goes through her life as someone who had polio and then now uses a wheelchair, and from childhood of fitting in, kids don't point out disabilities, to then realizing that her mother having to advocate for her to receive an education. So she didn't start school until like school-aged kids. And then it transitioned into her advocacy work of going to college, wanting to be a teacher and being denied that due to like a physical examination that other teachers didn't have to go through. And that theme plays throughout, of not being able to get on a plane independently, and being denied basic rights. And she helped organize a major sit-in to press the government to pass the 504 plan, which I did not know happened at all, and would highly recommend reading up on that. And so just kind of showing, like, I think it was, Jody, of like being capable of doing all of these things, like not being put to the side just because she has a disability. Am I forgetting anything? Okay, cool. I said I have a bad memory, but I'd speak. I think that kind of covers the whole book. Would recommend. We were all a little unsure of how we would like the book, but we would all highly recommend it.
Prefers in the government.
Oh yeah, so she was the first teacher in New York to be licensed, first person with a disability to be a licensed teacher in New York, and she had to fight for that. We think that she was one of either the first or one of the first women in the federal government with a disability that was like holding like a position of power. Oh, and I completely left out, like she did work in Berkeley, of like advocating for independent living. Okay, I know that's probably longer than 2 minutes. Good book.
Okay, so I'm Amy, and our group read Out of My Mind by Cincinnati author Sharon Draper. So this was a fictional story, which is important. We, as a group, I think had different reactions to the story based on our different perspectives and positions. And it is about an 11-year-old girl. They don't label her disability for quite a while in the book, but she's a wheelchair user who also does not use verbal speech. So you go through, it's written from the girl's perspective. Prior to having assistive communication technology, having some not really sufficient assistive communication technology, to then getting kind of a better device that really allows her to kind of express herself and be more included in her education. I think from a fictional perspective, we thought there were some things that were great. It talks a lot about both the champions that she has in her life, and also kind of gives you an idea of like some of the teachers or other people who are not so great in her life. We also felt like there were some parts that probably weren't super representative of what like real experience of a person with these disabilities would have. But I think if you take that with a grain of salt, I won't speak for others. I enjoyed reading the story, and I think we had some good takeaways. But depending on your position, just consider it your own position before you read it, maybe. Am I leaving anything out?
No, I think I mentioned to the group, it seems that the child is 11, but her intellectual maturity, the way she processes things, the enlightenment she has seems a little not really age appropriate. And so, but it is a good book. It has many, it really goes deeply into a lot of different characters. It goes deeply into the pain of living with a disability. I'm not trying to make maybe your I think it, as a parent, I can say it was a bit of a tough read. I was excited to pick that book because my daughter used a communication device. So I knew all the challenges that she explores in the book, and they felt very real to me. And I think, though, my husband felt like maybe her character was more like Stephen Hawking's in the respect that, poof, she got this device, and just ran with it. And she had, no other challenges beyond that. It was just exclusively her speech. So I don't want to dissuade anyone from reading it. And Amy, you've done a great job into reflecting what we talked about.
And I appreciate you adding those other pieces. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Maria. Our root, we read When My Heart Joins the Thousand by A.J. Steiger. So we were really happy with our reading. I feel like it was an easy read. It's a love story between a girl with a diagnosis of autism and a boy with OI. So it goes to describe what are the things that they have faced in their lives, how the system has failed them through so many layers, their families, how their parents saw disability. It is a really, really nice story. I think I cried a lot because it was so hard. So she describes how she wanted to be legally emancipated, and that she had to like looked out for herself. She was working with a social worker, but she wouldn't trust him. So because the system has failed her so many times that the guy seemed fine, but she wouldn't trust him because she didn't trust anyone. So how she opens her heart to this guy, and it's online first, and then they start seeing each other. And it is very interesting how he sees her as a person and not the disability. Like he was looking like her diagnosis, and she found that out, and she was upset because she thought, oh my God, you want to fix me. But he's like, no, I just want to understand what's going on. So it is a really nice story. It is tragic, but it is nice. Anything else?
Great job.
Yes, fiction. But we were discussing, and because it's so well written, like she's speaking about herself, we think that the author may have ASD or something. She doesn't have any social media, so we don't know. But it seems that
insight into that mystery because I was very curious too. I wrote the publisher too because I also couldn't find any social media, and I in my signature had my phone number, and I got this random call like in the evening, and it was the author. And so she called me back and she was like, yes, I got a message that you wanted to talk to me. And I was stunned. And so I explained and I said, you know, that I had OI, and like you said, I said, I just noticed that you really wrote with depth of your characters. And so I wondered, like, did you research or do you have a personal connection? And she said she had no personal connection to either. So
oh wow,
I don't know. It was an interesting conversation just in our communication styles, I did notice, but she definitely did not identify as disabled. Sharon Draper does have a child with a disability, so but yeah, these two fiction works, no direct.
And I'll leave my copy if anybody would like to take my copy. Anybody wants to read it.
Thank you. Yeah, this group, or you want to go first and then they can?
Oh, no, you guys can go. I didn't see you guys, sorry.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kavya, and our group read Accidents of Nature by Harriet McBride. So it's a fiction read, and we loved it. And we told staff to go ahead and put it on next year's list as well if she wants to. But basically, it's about this girl who's a high schooler. She's about to start her senior year of high school, and she goes to this 10-day camp with other students with disability around her age, maybe a few years younger, but like basically, I think it's like a variety of age groups is what I was gathering as I read the book. And some people have been at the camp for years, and this was her first time at the camp. And so she's been going to public school for years. And so she encounters other people her age who have either gone to other schools with students with disabilities or other types of schools or not school at all. And so she's like encountering new experiences with other students with disabilities. It's her first time figuring out, oh, I identify as normal because of my experiences, but maybe there's some stuff about me that won't change, and that's okay. So it's kind of an acceptance of her, like self-acceptance type of book is what we gathered, and her trying to figure out what her identity is in life and making connections with the people around her. And it's a really nice read. We really enjoyed it, and we really were able to reflect on like our fields, because all of us are in related fields right now, speech, OT, and ABA. So we were just kind of reflecting on what we might have done in our profession that we were thinking, oh, that might have been, maybe we said some stuff or thought of some things that wasn't really reflective of the clients that we're serving, and how we can be better clinicians because of different perspectives and learning from our clients and our clients' families and stuff like that. And so those are some of the conversations that we had. And the author also uses a wheelchair, just like the main character. And I don't think I mentioned that, but I'm mentioning that now. So we thought that was really It might be that she was pulling from her own experiences as she was writing the book. It actually says that in the acknowledgements, now that I think about it. So yeah, great book. If anyone wants to read it, let us know. We have 3 copies, maybe 4. So yeah, okay, have a great day, everyone.
Last but not least.
Hi, my name is Griffin. So our group read Fall Down 7 Times, Get Up 8 by Naoki Higashida. Naoki is a Japanese author who also has autism. Now he is primarily, his communication is not through verbal speech, it's through a letterboard is what he would call it, I believe. And so this book is really a collection of some of his blog posts, some of his short stories. And it really gives an insight on kind of his perspective going from his different environments in school to explaining some of his different behaviors, his different thought processes, and kind of going in depth on how those have shaped his life moving forward. Discusses a lot about his relationship with his family. There's also some tidbits about interviews he's had with the public and with different reporters around Japan. And then as well, it has some collections of a few of his short stories, a few of his poems that were pretty impactful. So overall, great book. We would all recommend that it be read. Yeah.
Is that the same author that wrote The Reason I Jump?
Yes, same
okay.
author as The Reason I Jumped. This is his second book.
Great. Awesome. Anything else, Dr. Ayers?
No, thank you all so much for reading and thinking about it. And if you find other books related to disability this year, please share them with me. I would love to read them, but also consider them for our use in the future. So, thanks.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the things I heard you guys reflect on and acknowledge and think about. So it's going to be a great year. How about we take Jen, give them 5 minutes and we'll come back at 3:10. Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.